Hey, it's the Travel Gigolo, and this is a review of the Canon SX70 HS. So, why the SX70? Well, this camera has a 65 times optical zoom, and that's the primary attraction with the camera. So for someone like me, this is a great camera because it's a fairly small, light, compact piece of equipment, and I can get 65 times optical zoom for taking pictures of birds and footage and so on, which is fantastic. This is never going to be a full replacement for a DSLR or mirrorless camera with an equivalent 1365mm lens, but it's a great piece of equipment that can do a hell of a lot with quite a bit of versatility for quite a low price in comparison to what you're going to pay for that. And just look at the size of this piece of equipment. It's nowhere near as large and bulky as a DSLR or mirrorless camera with a 1300mm equivalent lens attached to it. To start with, I think one must be realistic about one's expectations. Like I said, it's not a DSLR, and when you take this out to full zoom with a relatively small lens, as you can see here, you're just not going to get as much light into the camera as you would with a massive lens. So bearing in mind that, what are the virtues of this camera? What can it do really well? And where are some of the challenges with the quality of imagery and footage that you get out of it? So you need really good light to use this camera at its full zoom, at its full optical zoom. It has a digital zoom as well, but I wouldn't recommend that, especially when you've got this amount of optical zoom and you've got that little bit of light coming in onto the sensor. Shooting in the daytime with full light will give you pretty good footage and pretty good imagery as well. Typically you need a tripod to put the camera onto so that you get proper steadiness at that full 65 times optical zoom. Without a tripod at full zoom, it's really difficult to keep it steady. Of course, it does have a locking function, which is fantastic, which keeps the camera locked onto the image that you would like to focus on. So even though you might move about a little bit, it does compensate for that to the extent that it can. Shooting in low light, so sunset, sunrise, or just after or before those, is a little bit difficult just because you can't get a hell of a lot of light onto the sensor. Of course, you can use the camera at low light. You just won't get really good stuff at full zoom. So if you bring it back in a little bit and you're shooting stuff that's relatively close to you, you'll still get pretty good image quality and pretty good footage as well. And of course, comparing this to the equivalent DSLR or mirrorless camera with a massive lens, this is 1/10 of the price. It's a fraction of the price. So I've had the SX50 Canon, which is 2 generations before this, and I've had it for about 5 years. And it's a really great piece of equipment as well. I must say, this version, this model, feels a lot better build quality wise. Just the tactile feel of the camera and the type of plastics and so on that have been used, the materials that have been used are really, really nice, and they feel good in the hand. The ergonomics of the camera are really great as well. I must say there's a nice big handhold here. So for my hand, that's really comfortable. It's just the right size. I think if you've got smaller hands, it's still going to be really comfortable. If you've got really big hands, then you might struggle a little bit. I don't think it's a big thing, but this is a really good feeling camera and you can hold it in your hand quite solidly. So some basic things that I like about this camera and the generations before it as well is that it's quite easy to reach most of the controls on the camera. And one of the things that I really like about this is that when you want to shoot a bit of footage, the record button is right there where your thumb is sitting, and it's really easy to just press that and keep going. The shutter button is in a really convenient place as well, very easy to operate. The on-off button is recessed slightly and it's on the top of the camera. And that's nice because it's really difficult to press it by mistake. And I've had that problem with a couple of other cameras, which I won't mention. But it's really nice to have this. This is like a really sensible, practical thing to have on the camera. The flip screen is really good as well. I think it works really well. It's a decent size also. What I'm a little bit disappointed with is that it's not a touch screen. And I think at this stage in the game, you should expect almost every camera of this sort of capability and this price going upwards to have a touch screen. So I think that Canon could have done quite a bit better with having a touch screen on the camera. It's nice that the camera has a mic input as well. So this is really nice. You stick your mic in there and you can put a mic on. The difficulty with this though is that there's no mic stand on the camera, so you don't know where to attach the mic. You've got to hold it in your hand or do something with it. The other disadvantage of that is that when you open up the screen, and if you're trying to film yourself, for example, then the mic is in the way. But I suppose most of the time, most people are not going to be filming themselves with the mic attached to the camera and all the rest of it as you would if you were a vlogger, for example. Which brings me to the next point. Is this a good vlogging camera? The short answer is yes, it is a good vlogging camera. It's not really great for shooting yourself. So for example, if you're trying to take a selfie with the camera up there and looking at the screen and so on, it doesn't really fit in your hand very comfortably and all that sort of thing. And it's maybe a little bit bulky and big for that. It's just easier to do that with the cell phone or with a really small pocket camera. But because you've got a massive zoom capability, you can film a lot of stuff and you can film it from a fair distance as well, especially if you've got good light. So of course it also depends on what your vlogging content is and what you're vlogging about. So a lot of the stuff I do involves wildlife and birds and being outdoors. And in those cases, quite often you've got to take footage of stuff that's a fair distance away from you. If you're vlogging in urban spaces and you're doing a lot of selfie work and so on, then this is probably not the best camera for you. So one of the features that I really like with the SX70, which is not on the previous editions of this camera, is that there's a slow zoom function. So these two little babies here will allow you to zoom in and out at a relatively slow speed, and that allows the thing that you're capturing to stay in focus. The previous versions have only been able to zoom in and out from the zoom button or zoom lever that's close to the shutter button. The problem with that is that it moves really quickly and there's a bit of shakiness, so you can't get that nice smooth creamy zoom in and out when you're taking footage. So another thing that I really like is a zooming frame lock. And what this is for is when you're at full zoom, it's difficult to keep the camera really steady, especially if it's handheld and not on a tripod. And the zooming frame lock allows the camera to lock in, or allows you to lock the camera in onto something that you want to focus on. And then the camera will do its best to keep that particular thing in focus. And it works really well within the practical limitations of a 65x optical zoom. So who's this camera for? I'm not a professional photographer. I don't consider myself to be a professional photographer, and most of the time what I want is for the camera to choose the right settings for me. And I think most people that are going to be using this camera are going to be people of a similar ability, so beginner to intermediate photographers or videographers. So for the beginner, I think this is the perfect camera. And the main reason for that is the cost of the camera versus its capability. If you're a beginner, the last thing that you want to do before you really know what you're on about and what you want to do photography or videography wise, the last thing you want to do is go and invest a lot of money in a DSLR or a mirrorless camera with a stack of lenses to do all kinds of videography and footage and photos and so on from various distances. This camera will do all of that. This camera will be the equivalent of multiple lenses that you'd have to buy and fit to a DSLR camera. So what if you're a professional photographer? It's still a great camera. It's probably going to be a good second camera that you can carry around to just point and shoot at stuff. Of course, there are multiple settings that you can set just as well as you can with the DSLR camera as well. But I think the thing is here is that typically this camera is for someone like me that doesn't want to spend a lot of time setting ISO and setting aperture priorities and setting this and setting that. I really want the camera to do most of that work for me, and I think it does a pretty good job of that. At the same time, there are some really basic functions that you can change fairly quickly and fairly simply, and that's nice because you can just go onto the camera and you can choose okay aperture priority, and you can choose okay shutter speed priority, and so on and so forth. So when you want to make those changes and it matters because of the lighting or the position that you're in or whatever you're taking a photo of, a video of, then it's great to have that flexibility. I think typically a beginner wouldn't be too worried about that. They just want to point and shoot to a large extent. Of course, the better you become at this and the more experience you have, the more you want to use that functionality. The flash for the camera is hidden away. You have to lift that up in order to be able to use the flash. That's great because most of the time then it's protected, and the truth is that I use the flash quite seldomly. Now, what irritates me though is that in order to use it, you've got to remember to put it up. So One of the really nice things about the camera is that it's got wireless capability, so you can connect to your phone and download your photos and footage immediately. It's also nice because you can do that and then your phone can record your location and that information can be uploaded back to the camera. So, quick wrap up. This is a great piece of equipment. You know, for the price, the sort of versatility that you can get from it is really fantastic. And I think you've got to keep that in mind, and you've got to keep in mind who this camera is for and who should be using this camera. It's a really fantastic piece of equipment. I can't fault it. I am not able to compare it to equivalent cameras of other brands because I haven't used them. But using this camera and using a previous version of it, the SX50, I love it. So if you like this review, if you thought it was informative, then please hit the like button, hit subscribe as well, smash the bell so you get notifications of future episodes, and check out the other stuff on my channel.